Hello, and welcome to The Discriminating Gamer, the Benedict Cumber to your batch. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Star Wars Outer Rim from Fantasy Flight Games. In Star Wars Outer Rim from Fantasy Flight Games, one of four players is going to take on the role of a various scoundrel in the Star Wars universe as they travel throughout the galaxy in the attempt to become the most famous scoundrel of all. Now, the game board is essentially the crescent of the outer rim of the galaxy. You've got various planets and nav points and, of course, pathways to navigate between them. You also have the various decks, location decks representing the different worlds on the board. You also have marketplace decks. You have 6 different marketplace decks representing kind of different things you can buy, different jobs you can do, bounties you can get, etc., etc. Also on the board, you have 4 different NPC factions. Of course, you have the Rebels and the Empire, but you also have the Hutts and the Criminal Syndicate. They each have 1 patrol craft on the board at a time. Now, that patrol craft can be interacted with, it can be destroyed, and another one will come out later in the game. Now, each player is going to get their own kind of player board. With that, they're going to get their own kind of starter ship. Now, on your player board, you're going to have kind of a fame tracker, which starts at 0, and you can determine if you're going to play to, 8, 10, or 12 fame. The standard game is 10. You also have various trackers to track your reputation with the various NPC factions. Again, the Rebels, the Imperials, the Hutts, and the Syndicate. And essentially, you can either have positive, neutral, or negative reputation with them in this game. Players are also going to select a character. You're going to select one of the unique characters from the Star Wars universe. There's a lot of different characters to choose from. You can be Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, Dr. Aphra from the comic books. You can be Jyn Erso from Rogue One, Boba Fett, Bossk. There's a lot of different scoundrels and smugglers that you can choose from. Now, on a player's turn, there's essentially 3 phases. The first phase is the planning phase. If you have any damage on your character or on your ship, you can just get rid of it. That's the first thing you can do. Second, if you choose to, you can move up to your ship's movement value, and then if you have any modifiers that can help you as well, you can do that, but you can move. The third thing is you can essentially just stay where you are, just take a local job, and gain 2,000 credits. Now, next, you have the action step. If you are in the same space as another player, you can go ahead and trade cards with that other player. You can also, if you're on a planet, you can deliver goods, meaning you can deliver cargo, or if there's something else you're delivering, you can go ahead and collect money or the rewards for that if you've collected that, or a bounty. You can also do a market action. Now, with a market action, you can do a couple of things. You can look at any one deck and recycle it, meaning you can put the first card on the top, on the bottom of the deck. And then you can buy a card. You can pick one of the card decks there you like, and you can go ahead and buy it. You don't have to go ahead and recycle, but you can recycle and buy. You can recycle, buy, and deliver. You can do all of those things once during your turn. Also, some cards or characters will have action abilities. You can go ahead and fulfill specific action abilities that you have at that time as well. Finally, you have the encounter phase. Now, during the encounter phase, there's different things that are going to happen. Now, typically, as you're moving along during the movement phase, if ever you encounter a patrol and you have a neutral or negative reputation, you have to stop. If you have positive reputation, you can go right through it. But if you're on the same space as a patrol and you have negative reputation with that patrol, during the encounter phase, you have to fight that patrol. You go ahead and you engage in combat. More on that later. But what you can also do during that encounter phase is you can choose, if you're on a planet or on a nav point, you can select the appropriate card. You can draw a card that will tell you which planet you read from, or which nav point you read from, or the nav points you read from, rather. You can go ahead, you read that specific scenario and these little stories that happen to you. Sometimes they have skill tests, and I'll get to that in a minute. You have different little things you can do on these encounter missions. Finally, if you're on a planet, you can go ahead and engage with a contact. You're going to encounter a contact. Each planet has 2 contacts. There's white, green, and yellow, and that kind of tells you kind of difficulty levels or other factors there. But you go ahead and you flip that over, and you can see a character from the Star Wars universe. Again, these are a lot of characters from the Star Wars universe. They're mostly secondary characters like Lobot, but you also have some like Princess Leia. What you can do is, when you encounter them, it will tell you a number that they've got on that token, and you look through the database deck. And the database deck is a bunch of numbered cards. And indeed, you start the game with one of these cards, which tells you where to start, what like an opening job or bounty is. But you go through, you look for the appropriate card, and you read it, and it tells what happens when you encounter that character. Depending on where your reputations are with some factions, that could have something to do with it. Some characters can just gain that contact character as a crew member. For instance, Han, I think, just gets Chewie. Lando gets Lobot, etc., etc. But otherwise, you can spend money to get them, or you can try to recruit them. Sometimes you have to fight them. But there's different things that happen when you encounter those contacts. Now, occasionally, as I say, you will have to engage in combat. And there's 2 different kinds of combat in this game. You can either combat the ship-to-ship combat, or you can have kind of a personal combat against another character, another NPC character in the game. And how that works is essentially you roll a number of dice that either your ship or your character card tells you to roll, and then another player will roll for the NPC. Essentially, you want to roll more hits. Dice have, of course, hits, they have crits, and they have focus icons. Now, typically, whoever gets the most hits is going to win the combat. However, you will still take damage from that combat, even if you win. And if you take more damage than your ship hull value or your health character, you are essentially defeated. Your turn put on your side, and on your next turn, you essentially have to get rid of all that damage. You also have to surrender, I think, 3,000 credits and a few other little cards. But that's pretty simple. Combat is just trying to roll the most hits, generally speaking. Occasionally, you can battle other characters in the game, but typically you're going to be battling NPCs. Now, also in the game, occasionally you will have skill checks. Now, how a skill check works is essentially you roll 2 die. Now, each character has certain attributes on them, 2 or 3 attributes, things like piloting, knowledge, stealth, strength. And you're going to go ahead, and that gives you an advantage. You can also collect crew, usually from those contact tokens, and they're going to have some of those attributes as well that you can add to your own, so you can use them as well during the game. But what's going to happen is you're going to go ahead, you're going to roll 2 die. Now, all things being equal, you're only going to succeed on a crit. But if you have the attribute, you can succeed on a crit or a hit. If you have the attribute and one of your crew also has the attribute, then you will succeed on a crit, a hit, or a focus icon. So you're going around and around the board. You are going to these planets. You're trying to evade or sometimes fight the patrols. You're cycling through those markets. You're buying different cards, different jobs. You're taking cards out of the database deck to go on different adventures, depending on what the job or the encounter is. And you're trying, as I say, to gain the most fame points. The game ends immediately as soon as one player hits 10 fame in the standard game, or whatever number you agree to. As soon as that character hits that number, that fame number, then they become the most famous scoundrel in the galaxy, and they win Star Wars Outer Rim. So I played Star Wars Outer Rim several times now. I played it I played it solo. I played a few games 2-player count, and I played it with a 4-player count. Haven't played the 3-player yet, but play this game a lot, and I played it a lot for a few reasons. I'm trying. I realize that the player counts matter, and that was one thing I was interested in. But I just kind of want to see what this game could do, and of course, I loved the theme. This game is very, very reminiscent of Firefly, the board game, or Xia, Legends of a Drift System, or Merchants and Marauders. It's that open sandbox game. You can choose what jobs you want to do. You can choose where you want to go. You can choose how you want to get victory points, fame points in this game. So you make those decisions. It's very open, and I like sandbox games like this. I guess one of the big questions is, I'll get to how it stacks up to those other games in a minute. But first of all, let me just talk a little bit about some of the mechanics here. First of all, the game board with a crescent, it seems more gimmicky. Personally, I would have just preferred a standard game board. The crescent is, it is what it is. It's all right, but it didn't really thrill me, and it was a little gimmicky, it felt like. Having said that, I think the production here is generally pretty good. Artwork is, of course, phenomenal, what you expect from Fantasy Flight. Component quality is generally good, although the cards feel a little... They're not horrible, but they don't feel like, I don't know, Fantasy Flight felt like they had stronger cards, a better stock in the past, and it seems like the stock here is not quite as good. And that was a little disappointing. Not a big deal, doesn't kill anything for me, but it just felt like it wasn't as good a stock as I've played with in the past. The mechanics of the encounter is very much out of like Eldritch Horror and the new Arkham Horror. That whole encounter thing is very similar to it. It's almost like this game. It's almost like an Arkham Horror in space in some ways. But I really like that, and I really like that database deck. I really like how you're playing the cards and getting different missions and different adventures specific to those characters and those worlds, and I think that's really fun. I really, really like that. That really, I mean, this is really a story-driven game. It's almost a multiplayer solitaire game, so it's really, really story-driven, and I really, really like that. And I think that's done very well with that database deck. One of the things I was kind of interested in is when I played, because initially I played 1 and 2 player games, the patrols, the NPC patrols, didn't really seem to do a lot. It seemed like it was fairly easy to evade them, and they just didn't come into play a lot, and I was kind of disappointed in that. So when I played the 4-player game, that was something I was really paying attention to, and it seems like they did come in a lot. In fact, in like the 4 or 5 games I played with 1 or 2 players, honestly, I think maybe an NPC was destroyed once, maybe twice, but I think just once. When I played the 4-player game, it seemed like there was a lot more interaction with them. Still not a ton, but a lot more than we saw initially in those 1 or 2 player games. And it seemed like the NPCs were destroyed. I think we went through like 4 or 5 of them in one game. So that was pretty cool. I think they really work in a higher player count game, not so much in a lower count game. Now, the one thing too I was kind of concerned about with a lower count game versus a higher count game is downtime. Is there a lot of downtime in that higher player count? And one really good thing about this game, one really nice thing about this game is it's easy. I mean, once you read through it, once you get the basics down, this is a super easy game. People pick up like that. You got one good person to explain it, boom, they get it really quick. So people understand the game. There is downtime because you're reading those cards, you're taking those tests, you're fighting the combat. There is downtime in this game. It's not so bad when it's just 1 or 2. When there's 4, it's not horrible. It's not game killer bad, but just be aware it's gonna not move as fast when you've got a higher player count. Again, doesn't kill it for me. I still wouldn't mind playing with a larger player count because I do like what it does with the NPCs, and it's a bigger race and there's more competitors, and I like that. But still, just be aware there's downtime in this game. So getting back to my point, how does this compare with these other sandbox games like Firefly and Xayah and Merchants and Marauders? Of those 3, I think Firefly is probably my favorite. For a while, Xayah was, but I like the Firefly theme, and I felt like it was a more fun game overall, generally speaking. Although I did like the Tetris stuff with Xayah. But my problem with Firefly the game was I don't think I've ever played a game of Firefly the game that was less than 4 hours. I think most of them were 5+ hour games. I mean, that's a long freaking game. And this game, Outer Rim, to me felt like it was a lot more streamlined. The 4-player game was maybe 3 hours. 2-player games are about 2 hours. It feels like it's just a much more streamlined version of that game in many ways. Of those games in many ways. So I appreciate that. So this is a game I can have this and still have Firefly because they're different experiences. One's a fairly more streamlined, shorter game. One's kind of a longer, more epic game, I think, with Firefly. So I like that, though. You can't always get those epic games to the table, but you can get these other games to the table, these shorter games. And I really liked Star Wars Outer Rim for that reason. So what I'm saying is, where I'm leading with this is, I think Star Wars Outer Rim is a winner. I really enjoyed it. To be honest, this was one I didn't know if I'd like, just because I wasn't sure about those NPCs and how they'd work, and I wasn't sure about. To me, I was scared it would just feel a little generic, and I was scared there'd be too much from like the sequel series or even the prequel series in it. And it's, for the most part, it's pretty strong original trilogy. There are some, like I say, Jyn Erso's in it, and some of the stuff from the comics. There are some planets that are from the sequel series, but generally this is fairly rooted in the original trilogy, which is my bread and butter, which I love, and so I like it. Recommendation for the discriminating gamer for Star Wars Outer Rim. Yeah, go ahead, buy it. I think it's a lot of fun. Thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. We are The Discriminating Gamer, and I gotta tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I once had a bad case of Benedict Cumberbatch. I won't be batch for more.
Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't